Welcome to Beyond Sunday podcast, the podcast from Trinity New Life Church, where we take our Sunday message and we take it beyond Sunday and into your everyday life. My name is Chael Branda, and I serve as the executive director here at Trinity New Life Church, and I'm joined by Clayton Bell, our lead pastor.
Great job on the introduction. Nail it the first time.
Always the first. Technically, I did nail it the first time. This might be our second take, but it was not me that stopped the recording.
The security company called while we were recording, even though we're in the building and the alarm is not going off, and there was no one on the other end of the phone.
Let's also talk about
that.
Let's also talk about the fact that the alarm company is not supposed to be calling you. So
the amount of times that we have told the alarm company, "Do not call me. I'm not your first call," and they're like, "God, yeah, we're gonna make you our first call, though."
Every time. You can always follow along with us on Instagram at Trinity New Life. And since you missed my first introduction where I had all these hand gestures and it was fabulous and marvelous because YouTube is a thing, you can watch us on YouTube.
YouTube is definitely a thing.
You can watch us on YouTube, Trinity New Life. You can like, subscribe, click the little bell notification things. I'm told you're supposed to do that. All of those things.
Yeah. What's the point of subscribing if I have to get a notification of my subscription?
You would think that a subscription would just tell you that you want to be notified.
Yeah.
Like that's like a magazine subscription.
And if they're on YouTube, they'll realize the huge mistake I made. It's not going to make a difference in an audio medium, but it will in a video medium.
You were adjusting things?
No, not adjusting things.
Oh, what were you doing?
Look at our background color.
Oh, you wore your black
color.
shirt today. Usually you're wearing your green shirt.
Usually I go green or gray or at least blue or something that is not the same color as the background, but I didn't do that. So
I intentionally did not wear a black and red
floating
shirt
arms
today.
and a head today. Great.
So we are taking the sermon from Sunday. We are going to apply that to our everyday life.
Okay, let's do that.
We're on week 2?
3?
Nah, I know what
My
day
second
said.
week
yes,
preaching,
your
but
second
the third
week
week of the
third
sermon
week of the
series.
series. What'd you preach about?
We talked about this whole series is obviously home for the holidays, and we're going through and asking how do we deal with these relationships while we're living with folks, while we're spending time with them during the holidays. And so first week was church, last week was yourself and God. Actually, every week has been yourself and God, and then fill in the blank. And then the fill in the blank this week was your family. So what is it like to live with your family? What is it like to actually love your family? So we started with the same place we started with all the other ones. Your relationship with God determines what your relationship with your family is like. And the reason that we're always starting with God is because if you are placing unhealthy, unrealistic, or divine expectations on human, fallible, finite beings, then you are going to crush them. And when you crush them, you're going to be disappointed, they're going to be disappointed, and hurt is going to begin to continue on. And so sometimes they're not going to be crushed because you didn't even know that you put those expectations on them. And you just have them, and so you're just walking around crushed and hurt and sorrowful in those ways. So that's one of the reasons why we have to make sure that we're understanding that the tagline for the message was you have to let God be God so that family can be family. You can't allow your parents, you can't have an expectation that they're perfect. You can't have an expectation that they make no mistakes, and that if they made mistakes and they did things wrong, that you're forever defined, you're forever crushed by those things. That's not what we want to do. Instead, we want to make sure that we are refined by those things, understand the shaping influences that our families have placed on us, both, again, in our parents, our spouses, our siblings, and our kids. What are the shaping influences, understanding them, but making sure that we are fighting for the primacy, or the primacy, as I said, because I'm British, the primacy of primacy in our lives. So we have Christ first. That's, I think, the way to make all other idols have a hard time being in our lives, is to make sure that Christ is first.
Right.
And the more we do that, the harder it's going to be for idols to find a place on the throne of our own lives.
We talked about this a little bit last week, this idea of when we can get the relationship with ourselves and the relationship with God correct, then the other relationships, as we've been talking about, the relationship with our church family, the relationship with our physical family in this case. Next week, we're going to talk about romantic relationships and that aspect of everything else kind of falls into place. So it's been a fun holiday series. This Advent time, we've done a few things every year a little bit differently, and to take a relationship series was something that we hadn't done before. It was kind of fun.
We haven't done that during the Christmas holiday season before, right?
But there was this intentionality behind we're around our families a lot this time of year.
Yeah.
Like, where were you when you were writing this message and working on this?
Well, I wrote this message. No, actually, yeah, I guess I wasn't. Was I in North Carolina?
Yeah, you were.
Was I in North Carolina? You're right. So I'd spent
And
Thanksgiving.
I don't know how much you actually wrote in North Carolina, but that would have been the week that you were writing this.
Okay.
So.
I was trying to confirm because I don't write the week of, so that
Right.
wouldn't have been this week. No, it was last week. I would have written this week's message last week, and I wasn't in North Carolina last week.
You sent this message out. Trust me. You sent this message out on the Saturday when you came back because I had people asking me for this message while you were in North Carolina. So
Okay. Well, I might have been a week behind.
that's possible.
Anywho, I was in North
There's
Carolina.
some insider baseball for you.
It's in North Carolina with 10 people. I was one of them with 9 other people, 6 dogs in a creaky wooden cabin. Now, I don't mean to say that it's somehow haunted or not nice because it's my parents and my sister and brother-in-law's cabin, and it's actually really nice. It's just wood, and so
It makes noise.
it just makes noise,
Yeah.
and it's 3 stories, and there's, again, a lot of footsteps running around, going up and down, and so it's just, when the dogs want to go out at 5 a.m., you know that the dogs want to go out at 5 a.m., and then your dog is going, what, we go out at 5 a.m., and then you get back, and the dog's like, it's 5 a.m., we go out, and it's like, no, we don't. I don't, you don't.
Sleep longer.
Needs to be after 6. So that took him a couple days to break out of that.
Oh, fun times.
Yeah.
Fun times. So writing with your family or writing this message technically just after you have spent time with your family and these types of things. What are some of the, like when you were talking about let God be God, let your family be family. What?
Nothing. It felt like, I don't know. Sorry. It felt like you were like winding up for something. Like right there, and you're like, and or trying to like figure out a way to navigate around a question that you really want to ask.
No, I'm not.
Okay, sorry.
And navigating, I'll just ask a question if I have a question.
Go for
In
it.
this idea of what I'm saying is in this idea of letting God be God and letting your family be family. What are some of the struggles that you've either seen in your own family or you've experienced in some of the counseling and things that you've done as a pastor where this is a struggle for people? Like, what are some of those moments where you're like, this is something where I've seen people misaligning those?
Well, I think you're incredibly shaped by your parents.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you don't have your parents in your life,
Mm-hmm.
even if you grew up with a single parent, you're still incredibly shaped by the parent who is there. You're shaped by the parent who is not there.
Mm-hmm.
You understanding that there is not a singular, that your experience was your normal, but your experience is not the singular normal. You understanding, hey, did my parents enable me
Mm-hmm.
to be lazy? Did my parents push me harder than I needed to be to achieve?
Right.
What kind of geneograph? What did I come from?
Mm-hmm.
How many marriages are together? How many marriages have fallen apart on different sides of our families? And trying to figure out, well, what does that mean? Did you come from a family where the dad had a strong presence, or the dad was present but maybe parentally wise was absent, and so mom was everything? And so if you came from that and then you get into a marriage where the husband is trying to be a strong presence, that seems wrong or uncomfortable to you. So trying to understand, what are the ways that my family shaped me and influenced me? Now, you might be able to say, I wish they hadn't had that. I wish they wouldn't have done this. Or why did they do this? And this was wrong. And this was wrong. Da, 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 da. Man, that you could go down that rabbit hole forever. And you also have to remember what you're trying to do in going down that rabbit hole is you want to get better at yourself to understand. When you understand your influences, you understand, like I said last week, the ghosts that you're chasing or that are chasing you when it comes to your family, the more you're going to be able then to adjust off of that and to be able to be different for your kids, or to hopefully there's going to be elements of things where you can be the same for your kids. Mm-hmm. And so once you understand those factors, you're able to respond to them. But if you're ignorant of them, then you're just going to be backlashing against things that you are aware of, but not understanding the full picture. You're going to be thinking about your parents as with the expectation of perfection instead of the expectation of humanity and the hope of something. So you can offer forgiveness. That way you can also offer forgiveness for yourself when you know you're not the perfect parent. You've not been the perfect spouse. But one of the things that I sit down when people are saying they're struggling in their marriage, I don't do much premarital counseling anymore, is I always ask, tell me about your parents.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Tell me about your brother. Do you have brothers and sisters? Tell me about them. And if their parents are divorced, the question I almost always ask is, okay, so based on that, who is the relationship that you are modeling yours after? Who's the healthy relationship that you've seen that you're taking cues and patterns from?
That's good.
And when you don't have one that you can identify, if you don't know that, that's a big thing. Most of the time when I bring that up to people, they're like, oh,
that's a good question.
I'm not really sure. So then you have to so then knowing that, going, oh, well, what am I basing my expectations off of? What am I basing my assumptions off of? Do I know where those influences have come from? Do I know if they're good or bad influences? All of that then begins to come into play, and we get greater understanding. We don't always get everything. We don't get perfection, but at least we begin to get some understanding of what can take place in those moments.
Yeah, that's really good. Was there anything in the message that you didn't get into or that you wanted to go further with, or anything along those lines?
No, I think the faith for forgiveness. I mentioned this in the third service. I could have mentioned it in the other ones if I had thought about it. But the idea of how powerful forgiveness needs to be, and how much we need to look at our parents and how much we need to look at our spouses and forgive, to not be carrying around unnecessarily offense. Mm-hmm. Again, the reason that you don't carry around offense is not because somebody asked you to forgive them. So you have an offense that they've given you, and you have to carry it until they apologize. That's not how offense works. You can choose whether you're carrying it or not carrying it. It doesn't change what they did to you.
Right.
It doesn't change how they spoke to you. It doesn't change what they did or did not do to you. It changes how you are responding to those moments and to those experiences. That's what changes. Whether you're going to carry around in your body this root of bitterness that Paul talks about over and over again. He talks about this danger of a root of bitterness. I think it was in Hebrews 11, 12, something that I was reading yesterday, where that's where it said, "Let no root of bitterness grow up to trouble you and harm many." And I didn't get a chance to look it up in a couple different. There's a little phrase like that, I look at it in a couple translations to see whether it's the phrasing of the translation I'm really getting something from, or whether it's the scripture itself. But the thing that stood out to me was the idea that things may trouble us, but when we grow up and then when that seed's been planted in us, then we are we're casting that shadow over others, and we can now trouble many, or we can actually harm many rather. While we can just be troubled by something, others may actually be able to be troubled, and more people will be troubled by it. So making sure that there's an establishment of, hey, my parents didn't take me to church. My parents didn't pat me on my head. My dad didn't throw the ball with me, or all these kind of cliche things that people might want to complain about. Okay, well, can you offer forgiveness? Because when I said the story I mentioned in the third service of Matthew chapter 12, where Jesus says, there's a story of a guy who he was forgiven much. And then he turned around, and the people who owed him little, he put into debtor's prison.
Right.
And so the person who forgave him much said, well, you're going to treat them like that. I'm going to treat you like that, and threw him into debtor's prison. And the story ends with, as well, my Father will treat you if you don't forgive others.
Right.
So to say, I can't ever forgive my parents for what they did, I can't ever forgive my spouse for what they did, is not to undermine the seriousness of what they've done. That's not the same thing. And I'm going to forgive, but I'm not going to forget. What's the point of making that statement?
Yeah.
What's the point of making that statement? So I think that those, and then I think there's so much you can go into with parenting. Of we are. I don't know that I've never parented in a different age. So I can't speak to how this age compares to others. I always go back to that Jim Gaffigan quote in his Mr. Universe comedy special where he says, I have more pictures of my kids than times my dad looked at me. And how relevant that is
Right.
for what our expectations. Well, I could be a better parent. 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 I could be. It's like, what is realistic in our expectations that we actually have? Can we talk about whether it is possible to do all of those things? I mean, there's a reason that people joke about having the dad voice on a purpose, because sometimes you need to speak.
Sometimes you need it.
Yeah, you need the don't run into the
road
street. Yeah. I was like, what are those things called where cars are? You need that.
Right.
You need to be able to put boundaries around it, not just permissibility. If my kids don't get these experiences, who will they be? They'll be like every kid who's ever grown up ever.
Without experiences.
Without all.
Right.
Well, there's nothing wrong with experiences, but people have to like this mandate of I have to have all of the experiences. And that is a philosophy of life, a religion called extension. It's not called existentialism. It's what is it?
Essential.
Oh my gosh!
What
Why are we? It's not experientialism. Existentialism. Holy moly!
Oh, I was like, I don't know what word you're trying to come up with here.
Existentialism is a philosophy by which your life is defined by the experiences
That's what you
that you have.
You need to give the definition first, and then the
yes,
word
a
comes.
life philosophy by which you are defined by the experiences you have. Existentialism seems to be the predominant religion of our age.
Yeah.
And so that's why we've got to experience those things. And I just think the idea that, man, you want to be a great parent, but you cannot forget the God part.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like so many times we do.
Right. That's good. I think that there's something about what you just said, this idea of we've never parented in a different age, not just different age of like, I've never parented anybody over the age of 18 for another month and a half. In a month and a half, I will be parenting somebody over the age of 18. But you have that, and then you have the decade, the time, the culture that we're in. I don't know what it was like to parent in the 70s or in the 80s.
Ugh.
Like, I don't know what that was like. I have my experiences growing up, and I think that there can be a danger a little bit in the idea of, well, this is the way that I was raised, so it has to apply now when we're talking about completely differing, not just only generations, but how fast the cultures have changed.
Yeah.
And these things. And so we can get into a danger of being like, well, if this is the way that it happened to me, I have to do it this way. And you get in, yeah, you're right. You talk about parenting and the parenting paralysis, that section of your message, and that probably could have been its own sermon in and of itself, in this idea of there's so much there that I think that when we're talking about our families, the relationship between a parent and their kid, the scriptures that the scripture out of, I said again, I've got to stop that. I'm working on it. I really am. In Colossians, right? Were you in Colossians?
Yeah, the whole section was in Colossians.
Yes, okay. I wanted to say Corinthians, and I was like, that's not right. That whole section in Colossians, and you're talking about how the whole dynamics of the family, father, husband to wife to children to parents, and you're like, well, all right then. I think that you walked away going, if you didn't get anything out of that scripture alone yesterday, I was like, this was just I just thought it was a really great, timely message for this season with all of the relationships that are happening. I know that as somebody who comes from a very big family, this is obviously a very big time of year. We're doing sibling gifts and we're doing cousin book exchanges, and the expectations of being at this holiday event or that holiday event and all of the dynamics that go into this. It's crazy time of year to be thinking about these and to be reminded that, okay, I have to let God be God in these moments and let my family be family and treat them as such, and to not put higher expectation upon the family events and the things that the expectations that we tend to have this time of year over but am I celebrating with this season? Am I looking at the Advent? Am I looking at the coming King? Am I looking at these moments of like, this is really, I got to let God be God in these moments right now, because this is one reason for the season, but I was waiting for that one.
'Tis the season to be merry.
There you go. But this whole idea of just being home for the holidays was just really great.
Yeah, and I think this idea of, one of the things I liked about, well, one of the things I liked about the message, hopefully there's more things I liked about the message, but the who's in charge, and this passage again of the husbands do this, wives do this, kids do this, fathers do this. There's a whole section that goes afterwards that's slaves do this, and I wasn't about to, I didn't have the time in the message to dive into the idea of what does slavery mean, what does it look like in the Old Testament, is it indentured employment, et cetera. But it continued the idea that everyone's under authority.
Right.
We all have an authority over us. And so to ever think that you are somehow independent of those things and don't need to be humble, that's when we tend to get more prideful and more arrogant, is when we don't think that there's an authority over us, when we don't realize that we are accountable to something even greater than the human authority before us, that we're accountable to God. And I think that does change the way that, you should obey your parents because they've done so much for you, but you should also obey your parents when they're not asking you to sin, because God put them in charge of you.
Right.
And even if you don't trust your parents, you should trust God. And if you trust God, then he's telling you to trust your parents. You go, okay.
And you said this, I don't remember which message you said this in, talked about that idea of age doesn't matter. Like, your parents are always your parents. And the scriptures are not like your parent, children always obey your parents until you turn 21. And then at 21, you no longer have to listen. Like, I think there's a wisdom there. And this whole idea of being under authority and understanding how God gives wisdom to his people, how you can learn, how you respect and understand. Like, I just, in this season of life, there's a new understanding for me, even in, hey, Mom, help me through this. Hey, Dad, help me through this. Like, I still need my parents to be my parents. I might be, nearly 40 years old, but I need somebody to be like...
Your mom's going to listen to this podcast and offer you feedback.
She hasn't been listening recently. I think I'm starting to bore her. I think she's done. So, but it is that idea of...
Gammy Leonard is just not paying attention.
Grandma, she would hate Gammy, but like...
you never know what everybody wants their grandparent name to be.
No, Hannah.
Hannah already knows hers?
Yes. She wants to be Nana because she wants to be Nana Hannah. She's not going to listen to this podcast. I could totally call her out on that.
Nana Hannah?
Nana Hannah. So I was like, I don't want to be Nana. Can I not be? She's like, that's fine. I want to be Nana. I want to be Nana Hannah. Anyways.
You're going with Gam.
Gma, I don't know. I'm very much looking forward to being a grandmother one day. I think
that's a little too gangster for you.
I'm very much looking forward to the day where I am a grandparent. Because
if you were a grandparent, if your kids have kids
when
totally
you taking away all my thoughts. You were moving on, and I don't remember the sentence
if your
that I
kids
was
have
saying
kids
now.
when you had kids, when would you be a grandmother?
3 years. Crazy, right? Technically, yeah, no, 3 years. I was 21 when I had Michael. So he'll be 18 in January. 3 years. Y'all, 3 years. Let that sink in for a minute. Okay, can we move on from the fact that I am old and I don't even remember what I was saying. But yeah, I said again because you're making me think on the spot, and I need you to come in here and take
1,000% my fault.
That was 100% your fault. You can just take on from here.
Well, I do think that there are some of those, funny things that you think about because you forget. There's this phrase, the freshman always gets smaller.
Yeah.
Where it means that when you're a freshman, you see like, no, I can do more and I can be more. And when you're the kid in the family relationship, you think, I'm not being treated as old enough. I have, I want to be more. I want to be more mature. I want to take on more responsibility. And then you look at your kids and you go, oh my gosh, they're so much smaller than I was at that age. They're so much younger. They're so much more immature as I was at that age. And so I want to try to withhold from them the things that I wanted at that age because, well, they're the same age, but they're not like how I was. And the reality is, no, they're probably a little farther along. And you need to be able to, when you think about like, oh man, my kids might be meeting the people that they're going to marry. I said that too.
How old was Kelly when she met you?
15. So Caroline, 4 years.
See, there you go.
No, she didn't get married until she was 21, but she did meet the person she was going to marry when she was 15. Right. So. Which is super crazy. And we've got enough of these rugrats running around here who are all around the same age that I'm sure we're eventually going to have some level of mixture and marriage between some of these families, although the only other reason that would not happen is because they date and have crushes on each other so much when they're in high school and middle school that by the time they're like, no, I'm done with all of these folks. I need a new batch in college.
I need a new fish in the sea, people. Let's move on.
I know. There's one student in particular that I'm like, he is the most unassuming kid, and there's just always girls around him. And I was talking to his dad. I was like, "What have you been teaching this kid?" He's like, not happy about it. Yeah, I was just kind of like, what is happening? Like, there's always girls around him. So, but yeah, I think that our family relationships, I said this in all of our messages when we were closing in prayer, is to ask the question. The first question is always, have I allowed God to be God? But the second question is, am I allowing my family just to be my family? And sometimes it could be like, I'm just expecting my mom to be this and she's not. And sometimes you just have to, when you can come to terms with that, when you can say that out loud. Then there's other times when you can say, I really wanted my dad to be this and he wasn't. And then you have to see how that has weaved it, because he's been your dad your whole life or not been your dad your whole life. Because he's been absent, not because he's not. You figure that out. How has that weaved itself in all of your decisions? How has that responded in all of your decisions? And do you know the way that you perceive the world, how deeply that's affected the way that you perceive the world? And that's an important question to ask. And that's what, stuff like Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, that book, when it talks about going through a geneograph and understanding what the temperament, what the history, what the relationships was
your family
of your
origin.
family. Yeah, family of origin, different stuff like that. Knowing and understanding that a little bit, I think you start getting frustrated and angry with your parents when you start thinking about that, or your family. But then you have to realize, man, they're just people. They were trying to serve God, or maybe not trying to serve God. Maybe nobody reached out to them. Maybe nobody told them until you did. You cannot go back and replay the past.
Right.
So you have to determine how you're going to respond to it moving forward. That's the biggest thing, I think.
Families are tricky. Everyone's got them. And
well said, Chael.
And everyone.
Families are tricky.
Families are tricky. Everyone has them. You're not the only one that goes through. I think some of that. When you sit down, you're like, yeah, my family. It's just a crazy family. I'm like, let's bet money on everybody in the room has a crazy family when you really sit down and look at it. So to understand that if we can let God be God, if we can follow the God of the universe and we can align our life that the family can come alongside of us and can be supportive. And if they're not supportive, you still have the dynamics of a God who loves you and cares for you and is pursuing you, and everything else just kind of falls into place when you can let God be God. So
yeah. Well, that's our discussion on our message from this past Sunday. If you'd like to follow up with us, you can do so on Instagram at trinitynewlife.com. Send us an email at podcast@trinitynewlife.com. And as a reminder, we're going to be doing a AMA or a QTNA, and Ask Me Anything, or a QTNA, questions that need answering, over the holidays. But to do that, we're going to need you to ask and going to need you to question. So send those into podcast@trinitynewlife.com. Have a wonderful week, and we will be back next week with maybe a surprise guest.
There you go. Bye, everyone.